Hi, my name's Adrian, and this is my Module 6 Accessibility and Evaluation. So today I will be evaluating PowerPoint and a Word document, mostly because those are two things that I use within my own classroom. So I felt like I had a lot more knowledge grasp on these two items versus some of the other ones that I really don't use too much. So for the PowerPoint, one thing I will say is I don't necessarily use the PowerPoint for a lesson, step-by-step lesson for my students. What you can see here is obviously I don't have a title page for my PowerPoint because it's kind of a PowerPoint that has slides that I just will show up at different times throughout the day. For example, this first slide is an accountable talk. So it lists out for the students when they turn and talk with their books what the expectation is for what they should be saying. So that's why you kind of get the sentence starters, which for my kids is really something important for them to have that kind of a sentence starter. I do have some ESL students and students with IEPs, so having it numbered and listed out for them step by step of what they should say, and obviously the fill in the blank is where they fill in specifically what their book name is, what it was about, etc. I know within PowerPoint they do mention like making lists and having that in the specific order that they need to be in. So obviously the nice thing with this is I do have it listed 1, 2, and 3. And not only is it good to list it like that, with like the title is the first thing you're going to say, the book was all about the second thing you're going to say, and the photograph is what you're going to talk about last. But it also correlates with what I have my students doing with this. So one student talks and the other student is the listener. And the listener is required to show on their hand 1 finger up when they hear the title of their book, 2 fingers up when they hear that what the book was about, and then their 3rd finger up when they hear about the photograph. So having that listed in that sense gives the students the knowledge of, okay, the first finger I'm going to put up is if they tell me the title, et cetera, with that. So that's a good thing. In this slide, I have kind of their centers for ELA time. I used this originally, but I've kind of switched up my classroom. But as you can see, it does use the whole table formatting aspect of it. And I know in the accessible PowerPoints, kind of the keynotes about it, they do talk about tables and how they should obviously read from left to right. So on this side, it has the actual groups that they will be going to, and then obviously the times are listed above in a different color to kind of make that stand out a little bit more for the students. And then in here is where I list what group is going to what station. Down below you will see the list of my kids' names and the groups that they're in, and this is very helpful. It can be helpful in an online setting or face-to-face, just because with reading groups they do change. So having the students listed for that group is helpful as students are working their way through different reading levels and being put in different groups. If they're put in a different group every 2 to 3 months, they might not remember that they've changed that group. So having that listed there at the bottom, it's kind of put in bold. The only thing I will say about it is a little crammed together. So I think as far as visually appealing and easily able to find your own name, might be something that I would need to fix for an online setting and to reach the needs of all my students, whether it be adding more spaces in between it or somehow making it so that the table was a little bit smaller maybe so that I could have more space for those groups, so that their names kind of stood out, or even color coding it so that kids kind of could start to correlate their name with a color specifically if possible. But obviously just some things that we don't think about right away, but as you think about them through this course, it kind of stands out a little bit more. I do use kind of a PowerPoint design, and usually I just pick from what is there. So this design, although the heading area allows for the color contrast, the rest of it is just plain white, and usually the text color is black, and I really don't ever think about changing it. So that was one thing that they talked about, was just using some color contrast, something to kind of break it up. But they do mention that you shouldn't just change color to change color, like it should be purposeful and meaningful. And it shouldn't just be to kind of convey a specific meaning or to highlight a specific word. So if you look over here, I didn't necessarily change a color, but I did bold the group names, which I think is something that kind of brings the attention to that. And it kind of sets it apart so that kids are able to kind of find that a little bit more. Mostly what I use the PowerPoint for is I do teach vocabulary, obviously, in reading. And so these are some of the vocabulary words that they were just working on. And with students that have IEPs and students that are ELLs, the important thing to do with them is to always provide pictures to kind of make that connection to the vocab word, especially some of these words. For example, the first word here is culture, not really a word that is easily defined to a 7 and 8 year old. So providing pictures for them to get a visual for what they would associate with culture is very critical. So obviously they talk about photos and the clip art images that you use and how to put them into the text. One thing I have noticed with pictures is that usually I like to make the pictures as big as I can possibly get them with the text, because I need them to see the picture almost more importantly than I need them to see the text at that time. So for example, this picture, I could have obviously had it smaller, but it's important for them to each be able to see the different parts of the picture. Same with this one, to be able to see clearly what is different about each person and how that relates to the word culture. Over here, my students and I had a long conversation about this, and we were able to kind of pick out like some of the food they eat, some of the activities that they do is all part of their culture, such as riding on an elephant. Not really something that we do on a regular basis here, but, in other countries, elephants are a form of transportation sometimes. And even down here, this type of little cart, in a sense. We don't necessarily drive these types of vehicles, but over in other countries, obviously that's their main form of transportation. So you can see always the vocab word up top, and then usually the definition that we use, and then it always follows with 2 pictures. And I try to kind of make the pictures a little bit different in different ways. So here's another example, community. Another one is languages. So they're able to see over here, we were able to discuss like what are the different languages you're reading. So obviously I had to make this picture a little bit bigger than the other one. Same thing here with the word subjects. So it kind of just goes over the vocabulary terms with this, which is the main area in which I use the PowerPoint aspects. So obviously some things to like think about in the future. Because I just kind of show specifically what I want to, I don't necessarily have them in a set order that I go by. So for example, when I'm doing my vocabulary lessons, I just start on the first vocabulary slide and continue clicking after that until it's over. Versus in an online setting, I probably wouldn't have these slides kind of intertwined because for the most part, I would have it for the lesson laid out exactly how I'm going to do it. But obviously you can move slides around. So since I have math in the afternoon, like I'd probably move that slide down to the bottom so that it wasn't before some of my ELA slides. So just obviously things to consider when teaching an online class versus when you might do a face-to-face class, because unfortunately when you download, I know especially because I used a PowerPoint in my presentation with my students, I download the PowerPoint and you're basically clicking right through it. So if it is out of order, it will cause that confusion, obviously. Another thing they talk about is using different views, so such as the outline view. And one thing I thought that was kind of cool about it was just that it does kind of outline what is said in there. I don't know why it doesn't do it for all my vocabulary words or my ELA centers, but like for the accountable talk, it kind of gives the little wording of what's on it. Obviously a great tool to use, but also a bit confusing in the sense of you have a student that needs the visual aspects. Over here, if you just have a picture, it doesn't necessarily break down exactly what you're saying about that slide. So I don't always know if using the outline view would be something that I would necessarily use in an online setting. So the other tool that I'm going to talk about here would be the Word document. So this is actually the Word document that goes with their vocabulary PowerPoint slide. So you can see right away I do have a heading at the top, so it's just vocabulary. It's kind of plain and simple, but it kind of sets it apart from the rest of it. They're able to identify this is their vocabulary words for the day, or actually for the week, I should say. And then I just provide a table, and as you can see, there's a before reading column that has blank boxes, and an after reading column that has blank boxes. And in the middle of the two is where the definitions are. So, and then at the very bottom, I do include a little word bank for my students, because obviously if the words are up on the board, that's one thing, but for them to be right there on their pages, it's just an easier transfer for them to then write it in the box with little to no spelling errors. But you can see, obviously, I centered a lot of things, which is a good thing to do, just kind of keeping it organized and neat. Color is something I was actually, as I was reading about it, it makes a lot of sense to kind of color code things. Working in a face-to-face classroom, obviously everything kind of comes out black and white, so it wasn't really something I had ever considered at the time of changing up colors, and for example, like changing a color for the before reading and having that be a different color than the after reading, so that it was a lot easier to use. Because I do have my students to kind of identify the background knowledge that they know before we even go through the words, or before we do any type of reading with the words. What do you already know about these words? So they usually complete this column, and what I like about the setup of this table is that you're easily able to cover up the after reading part. Now obviously in a face-to-face classroom it's really easy to be like, okay, we're going to just put this book right over top of that column because we're not writing in that column right now. But in an online classroom there are plenty of tools that you can use to kind of cover things up, whether it's different manipulatives that you just literally drag over top, or if there's a way to kind of do almost like a little like screen over top of it so it kind of hides it more, or even if you just zoom in and focus more on, oh there we go, I can zoom in, focus more on the other side versus the side that you're working on versus the other side. But it's important to keep the definitions for me in the middle, and I think it's good for learners to be able to see the definition in the middle and be able to see the word they put on either side. So they can easily identify what words they understand and what words they need to maybe work on in the future, or as we work through the lessons. Other than that, I do have headings on top of all my tables, and the tables do read from left to right, which is critical. One thing I did think about as I was reading was also the idea of making them into a list. So numbering these boxes for students so that they had a number to correlate with where they were putting a word. I didn't actually think of it at first, but it makes a lot of sense. In a face-to-face classroom, my kids actually just count the boxes when they tell me box number 4 is where it goes. But obviously, that might not be easy for all kids to quite understand, as once they put words into a box, they may no longer count that as box 1. They may go to an empty box and say, oh, empty box 1, empty box 2. Which might confuse them as they're trying to put the words in the correct spots. Links and stuff I don't really use too much, but obviously in a face-to-face classroom, in an online setting, links would be awesome for this, because it would be nice to just be able to add a link to each one of the definitions so that the students are then able to maybe click on that link and see a picture of it to then hopefully correlate with the definition so they'd have a better understanding and maybe be able to identify it a little bit better than what they would just by reading the definition. But obviously not something that I had originally thought of when I was doing these little worksheets to go along with their vocab. So overall, that is just my evaluation of the different accessibilities of both the PowerPoint and the Word document. Thank you.